You know, Hurricane Helene was a fast-acting, fast-forming Category 4 that came into the Panhandle of Florida and then wreaked havoc on Georgia, South Carolina, North Carolina, Tennessee, up into Virginia, and it's been called the storm of the century in some of these places. And it's the unfortunate reality for a lot of people and what they're dealing with right now. Over 100 confirmed dead at the point of this video, and 600 to 1,000 that are unaccounted for. It is a crazy natural disaster, but it's also a stark reminder to gun owners that when you are at your most vulnerable, preparing for things like this is going to be so important. And I'm going to hopefully give you some tips on this kind of stuff for preparation. But also, gun confiscation is something we have seen during an iconic storm back in 2005, and I'm going to kind of recap that for you as well and tell you some of the details that maybe you didn't know. Now, no matter where you fall on the political spectrum and how you feel about guns and the right to own guns and carry guns, all of that kind of stuff, I want to hear your opinion. If you agree or disagree, let me know what you think down below after the video. If you like what I do, consider subscribing. Let's go and get into it. We have a perfect sponsor for today's video, and that is Aura, because along with protecting your guns and your rights in a natural disaster, and of course we're going to talk about how to do that, but also how to protect yourself all throughout the year when you're browsing online or even doing a background check for a job. 2.9 billion records have actually been released openly because of the National Public Data Breach, and this includes social security numbers. It's kind of like if you've ever been stolen from a close friend. Your trust is never really the same. Well, these people don't even have to be close to you. All they have to do is get your information where it's just out there for the world to see, and then use that to cause havoc and wreak havoc on your personal life. Now, the parallels I draw with protecting yourself online with Aura and self-defense are pretty amazing, because you're preemptively taking steps to protect yourself if the worst case scenario were to actually happen. And in this case with Aura, not only do they protect you online, they protect you offline and monitor all your information to make sure it doesn't end up in places it shouldn't be, but then they also back you up with $5 million worth of identity theft insurance in case the worst case scenario were to play out. These guys go through billions of data points to make sure that your phone number, social security number, address, everything that's personal to you, everything that makes you you, doesn't get out there, including in places on the dark web. And unfortunately, when I did my scan, I found that passwords and emails were actually found on the dark web. Now, they've set up a free trial for all of my viewers right here. No strings attached. So use aura.com/headshot87. That link is in the description of this video, and that will take you right over there and gives you plenty of time to see if your data has been breached. They can become your online shield when you're online and when you're offline to protect your information when you're doing simple things like paying bills online or even running a background check for a job. So again, aura.com/headshot87. That link is in the description. I'd love for you guys to try it out. And if you already are using Aura, let us know how you like it down below. So I've always lived in the South, and I've always lived close enough to the coast to know that hurricanes, they happen, right? Every single year, you're either going to have a scare, maybe a direct hit, or you're going to get sideswiped. Maybe a tropical storm, maybe Cat 1, maybe worse. But either way, you know, everywhere from Texas to North Carolina, you know, hurricanes are a part of living. But it still doesn't take away from the fact of how devastating these things are for the days, weeks, sometimes months after they've occurred. Once it's out of the news cycle, that's when people are like, oh, it's over. But rarely is that the case. Now, I do want to talk about preparation for being in these storms, but I want to look back at 2005 with Hurricane Katrina and talk about how gun confiscation was a reality for people and residents in New Orleans. Now, of course, Katrina, claimed like 1,600 lives, levees broke, massive flooding, dams break. I mean, it was just if you've never seen any of the videos from Hurricane Katrina, it absolutely terrifying, right? And people dealt with this. They still deal with this to this day, right? There's still abandoned homes and businesses from Hurricane Katrina, and you're talking almost 20 years later. Now, with so much going on, of course, it wasn't just New Orleans Police Department, but National Guard was called in. Several agencies from around the country, including ATF, were called in. And at one point, the New Orleans police chief at the time said nobody is going to be armed except for police officers and, of course, the other acting agencies that were there at the time. Of course, this is super troubling, but when you see the videos of police going door to door to door, no warrants, no nothing, right? Except for this Emergency of Powers Act that eventually a lot of states were able to counteract. A lot of governors were able to counter this measure after Hurricane Katrina and the outcry from the NRA and other gun rights organizations. But either way, they were able to use this Emergency of Powers Act to be able to break into people's homes, essentially. Bring them out in handcuffs, sit them on the curb, and confiscate their firearms. And unfortunately, there was very little pushback from this. Now, I've heard up to 1,200 guns were seized. Some say a little over 500 were seized. Whatever the number is, you can say, oh, well, it wasn't a mass confiscation event. It doesn't matter if one gun was confiscated from somebody that legally owned that firearm. That is still out of line. And fortunately, there's been a lot of states that have issued executive orders or been able to pass bills that protect citizens in case of natural disasters from this ever happening again. And while there was some incidents, very few incidents from what I understand, of police being shot at, the gun confiscation that happened in Katrina at a time when people are at their most vulnerable is one of the most disgusting things that's ever happened in the United States. It's definitely one of those situations that I don't think people should ever forget about, because literally people's constitutional rights were revoked from them in the name of a natural disaster. Now, the NRA ended up suing and winning this case. I think they said they would drop it as long as all firearms were returned, and then there's been other articles that say, oh, the guns that were taken were, just kind of throwaway type of guns and all of that kind of stuff. Well, unfortunately, we don't really know which guns were taken, but we do have proof of citizens, saying, some that were elderly, some that were my age or younger, whatever, of saying, yes, my firearms were confiscated from me at this time.
I felt like it was un-American and then we had been violated when they, took, like I say, we were shell-shocked. We were just sitting around looking at each other and said, we just got our guns taken away from us.
Now, if you've ever been in a natural disaster type of situation, one of the biggest threats you're going to face is looting. Some people, that are really ignorant will loot TVs, even though there's no power. This is something maybe they can't afford otherwise, and they're like, oh, this is going to be a perfect opportunity for me to steal this 65-inch Samsung or whatever it is. Others will loot water, gun shops, maybe pharmacies. Looting is just a massive crime that will happen in almost every single kind of natural disaster. That is something that happens even during natural disasters.
People have a right to defend their property, and I would say it's probably here, you loot, we shoot.
This is a big part of why people choose to not leave their homes. Now, it's really easy to say on the outside, you see, flood waters coming in. I saw this one video. This lady opened her front door, right? I think it was in Asheville. I could be wrong, but I'll show you the video here. But she opens her front door and there's water just everywhere around her house. It's a freaking river. Well, some of these people didn't know how bad it would be, or it was worse than 100 years ago. You're not really expecting that level of flooding, right? Or you don't know if you can even get back to your property after a natural disaster. Now, of course, your life and the life of your family is way more important than any physical items. But you got to put yourself in people's shoes when they are ordered to evacuate. Mandatory evacuations should be heeded. I 100% agree with that, but you also have to look at it from that homeowner's perspective. Everything they have put their life into, they've built that, and they can only take so much of it with them when they go. So then you have looters that that is a potential. There's no power. You're not going to have any security or anything like that. And law enforcement, of course, is going to be held up. 911 services, like we're seeing in Asheville, where there's no cell service whatsoever. You don't know if you're going to be able to call the police in the time of a disaster too. So judging people based on the fact that they didn't leave is only something I think you can really evaluate is if you put yourself in their shoes and understand that everything they have is there. And it's hard to leave that stuff, right? It is really extremely hard to leave everything you've built behind and, just kind of trust that you can get back in to your home. There's places in Asheville right now and places in North Carolina and Tennessee. It could be years, decades maybe, before this place finally gets back to what the people knew before. There may be some people that planned on retiring here that may never see their homes again. So with that being said, how can you prepare yourself as a gun owner for a natural disaster like this? Well, if you decide that you're going to stay, there's some of the obvious things, right? Having things to eat, having things to drink. I hope Hurricane Helene will kind of show people just how important this stuff is, right? Their water system's down. They have no electricity, and they won't for weeks, months maybe, some places. I hope not, but that's the way it's looking. So obviously having those essentials is going to be crucial. And there's going to be a lot of situations of neighbors helping neighbors and all that, but you can't necessarily count on that, right? Depending on where you live, how far are your neighbors from you. So having the essentials, food, water, all that kind of stuff is just, it's life-saving, right? It's everything. But you also need to be able to protect that stuff. So you can't count on gun stores opening up right away, right? They're going to be in the same situation that you're left in. So having plenty of ammunition available for you and your guns. And that doesn't mean just the gun that you carry. I'm talking about every gun that you use as a defensive tool needs to have enough ammo. What is enough ammo? Well, in my opinion, if you have a 28 round mag like you see on that MCX Spear, having enough where you can fill 4 to 6, maybe 10 of those magazines is my recommendation, because you may not always be able to rely on that pistol. What if you have looters that come to your home and you need to defend your home? Maybe you need to give a gun to one of your loved ones. These are situations that people do face. This is not some crazy zombie apocalypse type scenario. This is what people face, and you got to be able to protect yourself, because we already know that looting is a major issue after natural disasters. So having 4 to 6 magazines worth of ammo per defensive gun that you have, I think is a decent place to start. But it's always a good idea to kind of buy this stuff throughout the year. I've talked about this so many times. If you don't have the money to spend $1,000 on ammo at a time, dude, I freaking get that 100%, right? But buying maybe, I don't know, 4 boxes a month, right? 5 boxes a month. If you don't shoot a lot like I do, then you're going to be able to accumulate your ammo and have that available to you. Now, of course, you want to be mindful of storage conditions of that ammo and make sure that, it stays at a good, temperature, right? I don't ever recommend keeping any kind of ammunition in like a garage that doesn't have any kind of heating or cooling elements to it. If it doesn't have like a ductless type of system or a split unit, something like that, I always recommend keeping that stuff inside, because as well as I do, if you live in the South, humidity gets into your garage and it can surely get into, a lot of safes as well. There's some countermeasures there, but just making sure that you keep it as close to room temperature as possible. There's also desiccant bags that you can do to take some of the moisture out of your safe if that's where you keep it and all that. Ammunition is going to be huge, but also preparation with your gun. If it's been a year or 2 since you've shot your primary self-defense guns, no matter if that's rifle or pistol, it may be time to think about that stuff before a natural disaster hits. Just knowing that, hey, my optics are still good, I got all my batteries in them. That's another preparation thing. You want to make sure that you change those batteries out. I just say do it once a year. They probably will last you longer than that, depending upon the model, and if it has the automatic cutoff for the optic when you put it down to leave it alone for a few minutes, whatever. But I would just say replace them once a year. Replace them with your smoke detectors. That's what James Yeager used to say, and I think that's a good rule to follow. And making sure that they're sighted in, making sure that you're comfortable at whatever distance that you may think that you may need to actually protect yourself. And of course, you have neighbors too, right? So being able to protect them from looters may be something that you want to consider as well. Yeah, and that's one thing that you'll see constantly when these natural disasters happen is people put everything to the wayside. Politics and who you're voting for. And, oh, I don't like my neighbor because they have those 3 little garden gnomes and they just kind of, irritate me. Or, hey, you cut on my side of the fence this time when we were doing the grass. And all of that crap goes away, right? It's just about people helping people. Unfortunately, criminals will always come out when things like this happen, and you need to be prepared for that. Having ammo, making sure that your batteries in your optics are, of course, changed out, and make sure that you're going to the range. Doesn't have to be every single month, but consistently, and make sure that you're practicing and keeping up with that stuff. Swapping out your carry rounds is another thing you could do yearly, right? So just making sure that everything functions as it should and having that stuff before the storm comes. It should be part of your storm preparation for sure, just like water, just like food and everything else. Now, if you have to leave your home in a storm, you got to be very mindful. If you're going to a neighboring county, or even worse, maybe a neighboring state, to kind of escape some of these storms, fortunately, a lot of the places in the South, when you go to a neighboring state, you're going to have reciprocity there, right? But you always want to check that, right? If it happens somewhere up in the Northeast, right? Sometimes they do get hurricanes up there, nor'easters, stuff like that. You need to check the neighboring state for sure, right? You need to do this everywhere, but especially up there, because you may go into New Hampshire and it's totally fine, but then you go over to, Connecticut or Massachusetts even, and it's definitely not fine that you have some of these firearms. Now, what do you do with those firearms if you have to leave? You're under mandatory evacuation. You have this Cat 4 storm coming in, or Cat 1. It doesn't matter. I mean, the category is obviously makes a big difference. It's the amount of energy this thing has, and it can make a huge difference, like what we just saw with Hurricane Helene. It was carrying so much energy, so much rain. It was so big that places were getting rained on days in advance of the actual storm coming in. So if you have to evacuate, there are some things you can do. The first one you need to make sure you do 100% is your insurance policy. Make sure that's up to date. Make sure that covers things like floods and natural disasters. There are separate gun policies that you can get where you can insure just the firearms to make sure that you have enough coverage there, right? So if you're adding to your collection, there's one place in particular, I can't think of the name of it, but maybe it's something we can explore in the future. But it's like, for every $10,000 worth of inventory you have, the cost goes up by $12 a month or something like that. Now, if you have a few guns, you could probably take them all with you and be okay. If you have a lot of guns, it may not be practical for you to take them all. My recommendation there, take the ones that are valuable, that have any kind of value to you whatsoever. Bring the ones you can, and minus renting a U-Haul, at that point, you're going to have to leave some behind. Potentially, shipping firearms through your FFL. This may not be a great option for a lot of people depending on how much you have, but it is an option. Shipping firearms to yourself, to another FFL, or to somebody that you trust that can be in lawful possession of those guns. Now, if none of that is an option, leaving your firearms may be something you have to do. Now, of course, this is going to depend on where you live, where the storm is coming in. Are you going to be dealing with flooding? Well, in that case, maybe you can, they do sell like big pieces of PVC. I've seen some people actually talk about this. Could be an option. You put your guns in this, the big piece of PVC, you store them up in the attic, or you put them in waterproof bags. You could even get the ones where you can kind of, suck the air out of them temporarily, right? But just making sure that it's waterproof, storing them up in the attic, getting it to the highest place inside of your home. But you're also creating one hell of a situation for somebody looting your home. First of all, are they going to look in the attic for your firearms? Unless they know they're there, probably not. So you're also making it tougher for somebody to actually steal that stuff and protecting it at the same time. You could secure those firearms to the beams in your attic if this is an option for you. You could take cable locks. And if it's inside of a PVC or in waterproof bags, you could then secure it that way. If you keep it inside of the safe, making sure that safe is bolted down. Hell, I mean, you could even put, cable locks on it and attach it to something in the ground. I mean, you can get anchors for concrete if that's an option for you too. And I kind of chuckle at it because it may sound funny to some people, but to others, this means a lot, right? And so, and it's not just protecting your personal property, that's important, right? But it's also not arming criminals, right? We never want to do that. Another option you could do is taking the bolts out of your guns. Okay, so if all else fails, somebody, snatches your gun, they ain't got no bolt, they got no mag, whatever. You could put a ton of magazines. So if you take all your magazines and put them in there, well, they got no magazine, they got no bolt, you could put that in one duffel bag and be good to go. Of course, security systems, they're only going to work as long as you have power and or battery backup. But of course, that is another thing that's a huge deterrent, and that's the biggest thing, just trying to deter people even if they get inside of your home. As much of a violation as that must feel like, at least you did everything you could to not arm those people. And if all else fails and you end up losing them, having that insurance policy will make you feel a hell of a lot better too. So there are things you can do, man, and I hope that Hurricane Helene, Hurricane Katrina, even things like COVID will kind of open your eyes. We never know when the next pandemic or the next natural disaster is going to strike our area to the point where, gun shops are not called essential businesses, like during COVID when you had President Trump stepping in saying they are essential businesses. You had something like 30 states that said they are essential, right? Not every state is like that. So you never know. It's kind of like the grocery store. You never know when you might be able to get back to that place. So utilizing those things while you have them and while things are quiet is the way to do it. You never want to wait until the moment strikes to kind of do all this stuff. So again, my thoughts and prayers are with everybody that was affected in this storm, man. I love that area of the country in East Tennessee and Asheville. It's just freaking beautiful. Of course, Greenville, South Carolina, upstate South Carolina. I absolutely love these places in the South. People in Florida, Florida is a fantastic place, and Georgia as well. So, there's a lot of people affected by this, and I hope that, every single person that, is unaccounted for becomes accounted for, right? And along with the link to the sponsor of this video, of course, I do have a link. So if you want to help these victims out, of course, that will be there as well. Big thanks to you guys. And of course, leave me your opinion on this as well. If you've ever been in this situation, what did you do with your firearms? Let us know. Big thanks. See you in the next one. And as always, hold them down.